This is an abbreviated overview of plants. There's so much information that I can't cover, so I'm keeping it short and to the point. By the end of this video, you'll be able to provide evidence for how plants adapted to live on land, describe the general characteristics of plants, and explain how we classify plants. Back in the day, when Earth first formed, nothing could live on land. Eventually, volcanoes started erupting, which helped create gases that started our atmosphere, and so around 430 million years ago, things could finally move onto the land. One of the main reasons is that the ozone layer formed, and the ozone protects us from harmful UV radiation from the sun. UV radiation damages DNA and is part of the reason why people who tan too much develop skin cancer quite often. As a result of the ozone layer and the atmosphere, plants were then able to adapt to live on land. They pretty much had lived in the water before that. The good things and the bad things about living on land. Good things, more access to the sun and more carbon dioxide. Bad things, it's easier to dry out if you're not in a constant source of water anymore. To overcome this, plants developed three main adaptations. First, to prevent water loss, they developed a waxy cuticle, and this is a waxy layer that is found on leaves that helps keep water in. If I have plants in my room, you can go check out some of them and see this waxy layer on the leaves. Another thing is stomata, and this is the picture to the right. They look like little mouths found on the underside of leaves mainly. And these are for exchanging gases. So water vapor is one thing that likes to escape from plants, and they can use these guard cells on either side to close the stomata and prevent water from being lost. Plants, without being in water all the time, had to come up with new ways to reproduce. In the past, it was as easy as sending out reproductive cells in the water, and it would eventually get to the next plant. Now they had to use spores and seeds, which allow plants to disperse or send new plants further away from where they are, because if a plant dropped a seed right next to it, then there'd be competition for resources. Spores and seeds don't require water for dispersal, so that was another adaptation for living on land. Third, plants used to be really small, and since they lived in a water source all the time, it was really easy for them to get water. As they adapted to living on land, they got bigger, and therefore they had to be able to transport water and hold water and nutrients for a longer amount of time. So on land, they developed what's called vascular tissue, and this allows the plants to transport food and water throughout the plant. Xylem transports water and minerals that are dissolved in the water in one direction, from the roots up. Phloem transports organic compounds and some other minerals, basically food, up and down the plant. General characteristics you'll find common with all plants. We can see all of them without a microscope. They're all multicellular. Most plants you'll find on land. We still do have some early, ancestral type plants that are still found closer to the water. Almost all of them are autotrophs, and you'll see some exceptions to the rule shortly. Remember, this means that they make their own food. This is an example that is not an autotroph. This is a parasitic plant. So there are some that are non-photosynthetic, and they are parasites. This is called the Indian pipe, or the ghost plant. And there's about 3,000 other species of plants that are parasites and actually don't make their own food. The largest flower in the world, by the way, 3.3 feet in diameter or 1 meter across. That's pretty big. And it's called the stinking corpse lily. It's pollinated by flies. They don't have any chlorophyll. They're all parasites. So again, this is a non-photosynthetic, a non-autotroph plant. It doesn't even have leaves or stems. It's just a giant flower that attracts flies. Crazy. All plants go through a special kind of life cycle, and it's called alternation of generations. In this crazy life cycle, they have two phases. They go through a diploid, or a phase where they have their full amount of DNA. That's called a sporophyte, and the sporophyte makes spores. They also go through a haploid phase, where they have half their DNA. That makes a gametophyte. That sounds like the word gamete, which suggests that that's the phase in which they make egg and sperm. Here is what the alternation of generations looks like. I find this confusing. Even though I had a botany class all about plants, it was still hard for me to understand. I am not going to make you know anything beyond what is on this slide. So you should know that all plants have a life cycle with two different phases, that the sporophyte is all the DNA, the gametophyte is half the DNA. Some plants spend their life in one phase more than the other. But again, this is all that I expect you to know about it. We can classify plants in a variety of ways. We have two broad groups up at the top, and then we break them down from there. And most of the rest of this unit will focus on angiosperms over here on the bottom right side. Come back to this chart often if you feel kind of confused as I'm going through the hierarchy. It'll help you keep everything straight. Our first category is a non-vascular plant. Vascular tissue means xylem and phloem for transporting food, minerals, and sugars. Non-vascular plants are the most ancestral types of plants that we know of. They don't have roots, stems, or leaves. They might have something that's similar, but they don't have true root, stems, or leaves. They usually live in water. They're pretty small. Examples, and these are the three pictures at the bottom: mosses, liverworts in the middle, and hornworts on the right. Our second category is a vascular plant. A vascular plant is the type of plant you're used to seeing. They do have xylem and phloem, and then we can break vascular plants into plants that make seeds and plants that don't. Our seedless plants use spores instead of seeds. Examples in order of the pictures here: ferns, club mosses, and horsetails. If you flip a fern leaf over and you see the little dots on the bottom of the leaf, those are spores. Seed plants use seeds. There's two groups. We can break them into gymnosperms, which have seeds in cones like pine trees, or angiosperms that put their seeds in a fruit or an ovary. So grasses, most of the flowers that you see, grasses don't have fruit like you think of when you hear the word fruit, but technically that reproducing part of a grass is called a fruit. These are the most dominant plants that we find in the world today. Here on out, we're going to focus on angiosperms, the most dominant group of plants today. We divide angiosperms into two groups. We have monocots and dicots. One thing to know, in the word monocot and dicot, you see the ending cot. Cot stands for cotyledon. And cotyledon is, if you look in a seed, how many seed leaves does it have? So when the plant germinates, how many leaves does it end up with? Please fill in the chart about monocots versus dicots. Monocots, as you can see here, have one cotyledon, one seed leaf, whereas dicots, di means two, have two cotyledons. Monocots, their floral parts are in multiples of 3, so this picture here has 6, it's in multiples of 3. Dicots have multiples of 4s or 5s. If you look at the veins of monocots, their leaf venation is parallel. All of the veins go in a straight line, basically. If you look at the venation of dicots, they have net-like veins. You don't need to worry about the pollen grain thing. We're not really going to talk about it. If you cut a stem of a monocot versus a dicot, the xylem and phloem, as you see in the left picture for monocots, is bundled and spread throughout, whereas a dicot's vascular tissues are bundled in a ring. It kind of looks like an orange slice. Examples of monocots include lilies, irises, and orchids, whereas dicots include beans, lettuce, carnations, and roses. You'll be doing a lab where you have to dissect some flowers, which that sounds kind of funny, but it's actually pretty interesting, and you'll need to be able to figure out, are you looking at a monocot or a dicot? Now that you've seen this video, you should be able to describe how plants adapted to live on land, describe the general characteristics of all plants, and then be able to classify them and explain why plants are grouped into the classifications that they are.